All right, hey guys, welcome to our first video, our first actual video anyways. We're going to be talking about patterns of life, and our only learning objective here is to identify the characteristics of all living things. Sounds kind of basic. It gets a little bit more in depth, but doesn't get too crazy. So let's get started, right? So what is biology? You're in biology, but what is it, right? So biology comes from the Greek word, so bios, the beginning of the word means life in Greek, and the end of it, logi, it means the study of. So put those two together and you get the study of life or the study of living things, and that's what biology is. Biologists study living things, massive wide variety of living things. So how do we classify what's living? Living versus non-living, right? So characteristics of living things. In order to actually be classified as a living thing, there's specific characteristics that the organism has to have, and it has to have all of them. So notice here, um, all is kind of in red and underlined. It is because it is really, really important that a living thing has all of these things. It is very specific because there are a few debatable things which we'll talk about here at some point. So this list, sometimes it can be broken down differently. Sometimes they can put this with this guy or vice versa, but this is broken apart. So right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 7 things. Don't get too distracted on the numbers. Sometimes people will be like, well, what are all the 6 things, right? If it's 6 things, they usually clump these together. But in general, um, this is the list, and everything on this list has to be met in order to be considered living, right? So an organism has to be made of cells. They have to be based on the universal genetic code. So they have to have genes, which is encoded in our DNA. And there's a few things that have RNA, which we'll talk about. They have to be able to grow and develop. They have to be able to reproduce. They have to be able to respond to their environment. They have to be able to maintain an internal environment slash balance, and they have to be able to obtain and use materials and energy, basically have a metabolism, which we'll talk about. So really, really important. They have to have all of these 7 things. All right, so let's dig a little bit deeper. Characteristics of these actual things, right? So they have to be able to grow and develop as an organism. If they can't do that on their own, they are not considered living. They are based on the universal genetic code called DNA. In a few cases we'll talk about it. It can also be RNA as well. So everybody knows DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. RNA then stands for, this is just a little preview, RNA stands for ribonucleic acid. And the big difference here is DNA, I'll put DNA is double-stranded. You guys will get used to my terrible artwork. And RNA is single-stranded. So pretty big difference between those two. We will learn about it at some point. We'll get into the actual specifics of it, but that's a little preview. And then cell differentiation. So what cell differentiation is cell, basically it's a big word. Differentiation is just cell specialization, right? So in these living things, specialization, oh, I definitely probably butchered that. Specialization. So cells become specialized. It's exactly how it sounds once you break down that differentiation word. There's cells that branch out and they have very specific jobs, right? When you talk about, you're already familiar with these, right? You talk about you have skin cells, you have muscle cells, you have nerve cells, you have these cells that have very specific jobs, right? So cell differentiation is a fancy way of saying that these cells are specialized to do specific jobs. Our DNA, I guess that image wasn't up there, our DNA is kind of bundled in this double helix that we kind of drew a basic version of it right here as well. All organisms have to be able to reproduce. So they have to be able to produce new organisms somehow, right? If they didn't, their species would just die out. We'll talk actually about a few interesting species that can't reproduce, but in general, organisms do have to reproduce, and we'll talk about a few caveats with that. So there's two different types of reproduction. There is sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is where cells from two parents unite. So you basically have a mom and a dad cell basically that come together to create a new organism. Asexual reproduction is where there is just a single parent, right? And that offspring is able to produce an identical offspring from itself. And we'll talk about a few instances as we kind of get deeper in, I believe it is our 8th chapter. So that is reproduction. You guys kind of understand reproduction, probably the gist of it. So characteristics of living things, they have to be able to respond to their environment. They have to be able to evolve as a group. Organisms change over time. They have to be able to detect stimulus and respond to it. So it's talking about stimulus in their environment. So they have to be able to respond to stimulus in their environment. And I guess if you weren't familiar with what a stimulus is, it is a signal that an organism responds to, right? So you put your hand on a hot stove, you're going to quickly respond to that, right? So that would have been a stimuli, where a signal that an organism is basically responding to. But there's a million different stimuli out there that you can actually respond to, right? So characteristics, moving on, we have all living things have to be able to maintain a stable internal environment. They have to be able to do this thing called homeostasis. We're going to talk a lot about this. Not a ton, I guess, but a decent amount. And what homeostasis is basically maintaining a stable internal environment. You guys most likely have probably heard this term if you've had a science class of some sort. And we will get a little bit deeper into it on how we actually maintain homeostasis, but we do it very well, and we are able to maintain a stable internal environment despite what's going on around us, right? You can go to the snow where temperatures are in freezing levels, and your body temperature is able to maintain a pretty stable temperature, right? We can also maintain pH really well, so there's different organ systems in our body that actually have different pH, and we can simultaneously maintain that pH really, really well. For example, our body cells. So our body cells maintain a pH, pretty neutral pH. We'll talk about what pH is in chapter 2, but our body cells are around 6.5 to 7.5 pH, and it is a pretty neutral pH, but that's a pretty small window. And our body cells do a really good job at sticking right in between that. All living things are able to use materials and energy. So we talked about this a little bit, but materials are needed for growth, development, and reproduction. Another term for this, I briefly mentioned it at the beginning, is basically our metabolism. And what the metabolism is the sum total of all chemical reactions that occur in an organism. So all these chemical reactions that occur in the body is what we call our metabolism. And it is basically how we use materials and energy. So moving on, a couple pictures for reference, but a quick review. Here they are, and these are the requirements to be alive, right? So make sure you kind of remember them, and you have to have all of them. So in class, we're going to be talking about a few questionable living versus non-living things as well. So we will double check to make sure they're made of cells. They are based on the universal genetic code. They grow and develop, they reproduce, they respond to the environment, and they maintain an internal stable environment, homeostasis, and they're able to use material and energy for their metabolism. All right, thanks, guys.